Hello, I'm Luke, Hard Times Guy. Today I'm going to tell you another story about Lum. That last video I did about the old Lum picture that I found and about my friend Mike Bridwell. So many people seem to enjoy that. I thought, well, you know what, I'm going to follow that up with another story about Mike and Lum and George Gooden and his dog and one of my early dogs. And while I'm at it, I might as well do something else. I have for those of you watching this, because you're my Facebook friends and you find out I post all my videos to Facebook and my friends get an opportunity to see them if they want to. A lot of times they don't pay attention to them, but it seemed like a lot of them liked hearing about Mike. Mike, that video you saw about Mike is number 114 of my YouTube videos. There's 114 of them out there right now. This one will be 115. So if you want to see some of those, you might go to my channel called Hard Times Chronicles, and you can see all those videos. They're about all different kinds of things. Not all of them's about my friends necessarily, but a lot of them are about my family. A lot of them are family value stories. A lot of them are about antiques and auctions and things that I like to do. Hard Times Chronicles, YouTube channel. 115 videos out there when you're looking at this one. Subscribe to the channel and you can keep up with all of them. Also, I'm going to make one more video kind of like these, but not like these. It's about another friend of mine who was my bird hunting partner for a lot of years. Morris Rogers. Real soon I'm going to talk about Morris in a video. So I don't do that very often, but give me a heads up about what's coming. I mentioned in that last video that I'd written a book, and in that book, Observations of Basketball and Bird Dogs, I tell this story about Lum and Bud's sister Susie, her duck. And I'm not going to read it today out of the book. I'm just going to tell you the story, and I'm going to ad-lib a little bit to give you some other details. This story takes place back in probably late 1970s, early 1980s. I don't know for sure, but I do know that the dog I'm hunting was my first real bird dog. And I got him in 1975, and I was still hunting with him then, and so it's that dog. Also, the truck that I talk about in this story was a 1979 Love truck, and I had that for 3 or 4 years, starting in 1979 or 80 when I got that truck. Shannon, my oldest daughter, totaled a new 1979 Silverado I had. I took the insurance money and bought this little Love that used, and I drove it for several years, so it's the truck I talk about in this video. Bird hunting is, and I'm going to make a video about this too. I'm going to make a video about what I think about bird hunting, and I don't make squat about anything, it's just what I think. But I approached bird hunting seriously. It was something I just absolutely loved to do, and it was something that I thought had a right way and a wrong way to do it. And I had rules that I lived by. It was almost like a spiritual experience, bird hunting was to me. And it should be done a certain way, and there's certain things that should be observed. And I'm going to make a video about that. But not this one. I'm just telling you that to tell you that one of those things that I think bird hunting is, it's something that 2 men and 2 dogs ought to do. Now you can add more dogs to that before you can add men to it, I think. And if you go any variance from 2 men and 2 dogs, you ought to go back to 1 man and 1 dog and then start adding dogs. But I just said that to introduce the bird hunting thing. This story has 3 men and 2 dogs. The 3 men are Mike Bridwell, George, Bud, Gooden, and me. 3 close friends. Known each other for at least junior high school days, and Mike and I think met before that. I don't think I met Bud until we were 7th graders, but those 2 men were among the best friends I ever had. They're both gone now, but suffice it to say that I loved them both, and I feel like they could testify that they felt that way about me too, and about one another. So we're the men in the story. We each had a dog, and my dog at this point in time was a little fine-boned, small, black and white setter, and he was a heck of a dog. But the story's not about him, so I'm just going to tell you that I had a little black and white setter that I really cared a lot about, and was a good dog. George, Bud, he had a little all-white, I'm going to say dropper. If you don't know what a dropper is, it's a crossbred dog that was part setter and part pointer. He called that dog a setter, but it wasn't a setter. It wasn't purebred setter. He was what most people call a dropper. His name was Smokey. And in George's lifetime, he had 2 dogs. Smokey was his first dog, and he loved that dog. Later on, he had another little pointer that was black and white. He never did make much of a dog, and he kind of wore Bud out on that second dog. Kind of wore Bud out on bird hunting. That dog was more of a nuisance than he was fun, and Bud still bird hunted the rest of his life, but he didn't keep a dog and care for one after that dog, and so he wasn't a regular hunter after that. And then Mike had Lum, and Lum was Mike's first dog. He had another little dog after that was a litter mate to the same little dog I just told you that Bud had. It was a little liver and white, fine-boned, small pointer. And he was about like Bud's dog. Neither one of them dogs ever made much of a bird dog, so both of them dogs ended up making both of them guys quit having dogs and quit bird hunting, except when they could be the guests of somebody that had a dog. That was usually me. But this story takes place back when we were all young and all had our own dog and all hunted frequently. And Mike did most of his hunting with a man named Nelson Brannaman. If you don't know who Nelson was, some of you people that are my age do know who Debbie Brannaman was. Her name's Bolton now. Debbie was a classmate of those of us who graduated in 1965, and her dad's name was Nelson. He was a bird hunter all his life, and he had a liver and white pointer at this time, and her name was Sugar. And Mike and Nelson were regular hunting partners. They went, most often when they went bird hunting, it was Nelson and Mike and Sugar and Lum. And George and I were regular hunting partners. And when we went hunting, it was George and Smokey and me and my little dog, and his name was Billy. That's how it was most of the time. But because we were good friends, we often included others in our hunt. And this day, Mike and Lum were going with us, George and I, on one of our places that we regularly hunt. And it happened to be a big farm out towards Williams, where Dave Parker lives. Back in those days, Dave had just bought that place. That farm was one of the casualties of Jimmy Carter's presidency and the high interest rates and inflation and problems that we had in the early 80s, people going bankrupt, and a lot of farmers went bankrupt. They borrowed that high interest money and couldn't make it as farmers because of it. And that big farm was one of those places. David bought that through bankruptcy court or at a tax sale or something like that. He bought that farm. And it had sat idle for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years before Dave bought it. And when he bought it, Bud and I started hunting it. And it was all growed up, and man, there was a lot of birds there. I mean, a lot of birds. It was hard to hunt because there was also 400 acres of horseweeds over your head. So it was hard to hunt that and hard to keep track of a dog, but boy, we loved hunting that. The time of this story, though, David had hired, or he'd made an agreement with Wendy Spreen, and the Spreen family was farming his place for him, and they began to get it cleaned up. And they had it pretty cleaned up. It wasn't near as good a bird hunting place as it used to be, but there were still birds there, and we still like to go there. So this day, that's where we were, and it was a kind of a warm day. I'm going to say probably by the time this story ends, it was up above 75 that day. Really too warm to bird hunt, my way of thinking. I like for it to be cold where the dog's tails crack and you can see your breath. But that day, it was a warm day, and we went on this hunt. It was George, Mike, me, Lum, and Billy. No Smokey. And I got to tell you, it's important to this story that you understand this. It's a rare thing when you get a man to go bird hunting without his own bird dog. But there was a thing between Smokey and Lum. Lum didn't like Smokey, and Smokey didn't like Lum, and they frequently fought when you tried to hunt them together. And Mike wasn't ever going to go bird hunting without Lum. And so even though Mike was a guest to George and I, and we were hunting on Bud's sister's place, Mike wasn't going without Lum, so for the sake of things going smooth, Bud left Smokey at home. So we only had 2 dogs and 3 guys. And at the start of the day, it was warm when we started that day, and Mike was complaining about it being too warm to hunt. He was talking about poor old Lum and how he didn't like it to be this hot when he hunted, and how he'd probably wear down and stuff. Lum was 6 years old. Lum should have been in the prime. I mean, a 6-year-old bird dog should be prime. That should be his best years, 6, 7, 8, maybe 5, right in there. I mean, he should be the best that he's ever been. He should be in wonderful shape, but Lum wasn't. He's fat, out of shape. Mike started in complaining right off the bat that it's going to be hard on poor old Lum that day. And this place was a big place. I said 400 acres. It wasn't quite that. I think it was maybe like 355 or 365, something like that. Big place, kind of hilly, rough ditches, rough sinkholes, 4 or 5 ponds on it, which helped the dogs to stay hydrated and cooled off. But a lot of ground to cover, and we covered most of it that day. And unfortunately, we didn't have much luck. I don't think we even found any birds that day. We might have if we did. They got mishandled, and we didn't have any good experience with them. But we'd made the whole loop, and we were coming back towards the front of the farm and across the front of the farm, and there, close to the barn and the house, was a big old spring-fed pond, and we come up over the ridge. My dog was out there still hunting and acting like a bird dog. He was going, looking in likely places. But Lum, he was walking along at Mike's heel with his tail and head both down and panting, and Mike had been complaining for a long time that we'd wore poor old Lum out and it was too hot for her to hunt. And that's where Lum was, and that's what he was doing when we come up over this rise. And when we did, and got where we could see that pond up on the slope, about, I don't know, 40, 50 yards from the pond, waddling down towards the pond was this big old white duck. And poor old, about to die, pitiful Lum, when he saw that duck, he took off like a thoroughbred racehorse. I mean, he found new life somewhere, and he took off. And we at this point in time we was still in the picked cornfield, and the mud clods and the corn stalks and the dust was flying up behind him like a rooster tail. He looked like a, if you didn't know better, you'd think it's a motorcycle going out through there instead of him. He was flat moving and flat throwing stuff up behind him in pursuit of that duck. Of course, Mike, he seen it all developing, so did George. Mike got his whistle. He started blowing at his whistle and yelling and cussing at Lum, and it didn't do no good. Lum did what he always did. He did what he wanted to. Man, he was going to get that duck. And boy, he almost did. That duck just in the nick of time ran and launched into flight just right ahead of Lum's jaws, snapping at his tail feathers. And he sailed off into the middle of that pond. Once he got in that pond, everything was in his favor, not Lum's, but Lum, he didn't care. He was going to get that duck. And he dove in that pond and he started swimming out there, barking and carrying on like a fool at that, and Mike blowing his whistle and shouting obscenities and yelling at Lum, and me and George standing there just laughing. It was hilarious. Lum trying to catch a duck in the middle of a pond, and Mike trying to get Lum to come back. And great fun for everybody but Mike and Lum. For, I don't know, 10 minutes, maybe longer. But you could see Lum starting to wear down. He was getting tired. And he was swimming slower. And he'd get almost to that duck, and that duck then would just light off the pond and fly 30, 40 feet over the Lum's head and then land again. And Lum would lunge at him and then go down in the water, and he would bark as he lunged, and his barks got to be weaker and weaker, and he'd hit the water and he'd go glub, glub, glub as he tried to bark and sink into the, and it began to look, things began to look bad for Lum. And then things went south real fast. It got ugly. Mike said, well, poor old Lum going to drown itself trying to catch that duck. I'm going to have to shoot that duck. Now that duck was one of these little yellow fuzzball at Easter ducks. Something that somebody got Susie at Easter time when it was a little yellow fuzzball you could hold in your hand, and she'd raised that duck, and it just was like the farm pet. It wasn't just some old ordinary duck. You weren't going to buy another duck and replace that duck. And when Mike said that, I looked at George, because I knew the situation about that duck. And he turned, stone cold, steely-eyed, serious. And he said, "That's my sister's duck, and you're not shooting that duck. If you do, I'm going to shoot your damn dog." And there wasn't any doubt in anybody's mind that he meant just exactly what he said. And Mike, he loved that dog. And it did look like that dog was just stupid enough to drown himself chasing that duck. And so he said, even though a lot of the conviction that went out of his voice, he said, "Bud, old Lum's going to drown. I may have to shoot that duck." And I looked at Bud, and his jaw was set. He's through talking. He'd already said all he was going to say about it. And I thought about, well, here's two of the best friends I got on earth, and this has gotten really serious. And they're standing there with, both of them's got a loaded 12-gauge shotgun across their elbow. I wasn't about to get between them. And I looked over there where my truck was parked, maybe 100 yards away. And up against that barn or shed there leaned a flat bottom aluminum boat. And I said, "Guys, I see a boat over there." I said, "Let's go get that and we can get Lum out of there." But they wasn't budging. So I said, "I'm going to go get that boat." And I took off. And I run as fast as I could in them heavy hunting boots until I got over there. And then I decided that boat was a little bigger than what I could handle by myself. I didn't know where I'd get in my truck or not, but I decided just to take the rope that was on the end of it and tie it on my trailer hitch and drag it over there. So I got in my truck and backed it up to turn around and get the trailer hitch towards the boat. And when I did, I saw that Lum had give up. And he had come to the bank. Almost to the bank. He'd got in there about, I don't know, elbow deep on his legs, and he just flopped over sideways. And he was laying there in the water, panting. So instead of getting the boat, I just drove my truck right straight back over there. I got out. Bud was standing there looking out on the pond at the duck and looking back at Lum. Mike, he was down there on his knees in the water, stroking Lum's head and saying stupid things to him like a teenager talking to his girlfriend on the telephone. "That mean old duck. Did you get after that mean old duck, Lummy?" Stuff like that. And I said, "Thank you, Lord." I said a little prayer of thanks, because I actually thought that something really bad could happen. And it didn't. And so now that story's funny again, but there was a time there, just a little time, when it wasn't funny. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I like to think that cooler heads would prevail, but I don't know. And in talking about it later with Mike and with Bud, Bud said, "You remember that time over at Oliver's that we was over there grouse hunting and Lum and Smokey got into it and Lum like to killed him? Cost me $175 at the vet to get him sewed up. You remember that? You think I'm going to let that stupid dog kill my..." There were strong feelings there. I'm glad I can tell that story, and it's funny. It had a good ending. That's the story, Lum and the duck. And even though it went south for a while, I fondly remember days like that with those two friends. And I'm thankful that they were my friends. And I can say I knew them. I'm a hard times guy. Have a good day.